Welcome to CinemaSpection. I'm Tim.
I'm Corinne.
And we're taking a trolley ride together all the way to the end of the line. And it's a one-way trip, and the last stop is Double Indemnity from 1944.
I killed Dietrichson. Me, Walter Neff, insurance agent, 35 years old, unmarried, no visible scars. Yeah, I killed him. I killed him for money and for a woman. It all began last May.
I can't stand it anymore. What if they do hang me?
They're not going to hang you, baby.
It's better than going on this way.
They're not going to hang you. Because you're going to do it and I'm going to help you.
Yes, from the moment they met, it was murder. But always behind them with his devilish hunches and his brilliant brain was Keyes.
I'd have the cops after her so quick it'd make her head spin. Now, we know the Dietrichson dame is in it, and somebody else.
Only you haven't got a single thing to go on, Keyes.
Could they get away from him and his relentless pursuit? And could they get away with murder?
Insurance salesman Walter Neff was just looking to renew an auto policy. He didn't plan on encountering Phyllis Dietrichson, his client's alluring wife, who seduces him into a scheme to set up her husband with life insurance and murder him. Neff, who knows the insurance game inside and out, is determined that they'll commit the perfect crime, and the pair plan it out to meticulous detail. But Neff's associate, wily insurance investigator Barton Keyes, is quick to suspect that something isn't right with the Dietrichson claim, while Neff's own suspicions about Phyllis's plans for him threaten to tear the pair's murderous love affair asunder. As usual, we'll be discussing Double Indemnity in detail, so if you haven't seen the movie and wish to remain unspoiled, we recommend watching the film before listening to the rest of this episode.
Double Indemnity was released by Paramount Pictures on April 24th, 1944 for a budget of $980,000. Its box office was $5 million. It was based on a novel by James M. Cain and was nominated for Best Picture, Director, Best Actress, Screenplay, Cinematography, Music, and Sound. It didn't win any. The Best Picture went to Going My Way, director to Leo McCarey, actress Ingrid Bergman for Gaslight, and screenplay went to Going My Way.
When Going My Way proved to be the big winner at the Oscar ceremony, Wilder, who was sure that his movie was going to win something, stuck his foot into the aisle and tripped Leo McCarey, the director of that movie, as he went up to take the Best Picture Oscar.
Yeah. That's terrible.
And after the ceremony, he could be heard yelling up to the crowd, "What the hell does the Academy Award mean anyway?" A little bitter there, Billy. Yeah.
Just a little bit.
The cinematography one really kind of shocks me because
that it didn't win. I know
it lost to Laura, which is another great film noir, really beautifully filmed. But I mean,
it is. But when I think of film noir, the highlight of that era, that film era for me, was Double Indemnity, and still is Double Indemnity.
I mean, this is kind of the visual aesthetic for noir right there.
Yeah, if you want to give a crash course on everything to look for in a noir film, just watch Double Indemnity.
So what was your first experience with this movie?
You know, I wish I could remember. I spent my early 20s watching a lot of films in the way that one would watch films if one had to do homework. So
Ticking the boxes out.
Yeah. So I mean, I was actually reading literature the same way at the time. So I went through some of the Russian classics and some of the British classics, but I also went through silent films, black and white films, highlights from each major film genre. So, representative for noir was Double Indemnity. So, I must have been in my early 20s.
Right around the same period for me. It was when I was at Blockbuster Video, and I just kind of used that as basically my film school and was tearing through everything. And I went through this whole noir period. And this one was pretty early on. And, I mean, as soon as you see it, you see why it's such a classic. It is so amazing. The dialogue still rings. It's still, as we said, gorgeous looking. The acting is all terrific. It really does set the pattern for these movies, and one that I think a lot of crime films still follow to this day. Let's talk about some of the characters. First of all, you have Fred MacMurray as Walter Neff. And it's weird because Fred MacMurray, most people would think The Absent-Minded Professor or My Three Sons. And yet, if you think back to his film roles, he seems to be at his best in movie roles when he's playing a heel. You have this one, you have him as the asshole boss from The Apartment, the cowardly lieutenant from the Caine Mutiny. Whenever he's playing a jerk, he's just really good. And I don't know if part of it is just feeling like he's always playing against type, but it seems to be one of his real talents.
There are very few actors who can bounce between types of character quite the way he did with this.
And this dialogue, I mean, it's great dialogue, but I could so easily see it going wrong.
It's hammy.
Yeah.
It's banter more than it is dialogue. People don't really talk to each other more than they waltz.
It would be so easy to put too much in it, but MacMurray's so good at just kind of spitting out the lines very casually and making it sound like he's actually just saying them, not reciting dialogue in a script.
It's very Shakespearean in that way. I was struck by how often his acting was just with his eyes. You know, like, he was not smizing. He was he was definitely giving very, very complicated acting through his eyes, and just the way he would tighten his face slightly. There were like 30 seconds worth of acting where not a word was spoken, and he is just staring out into space, and you can see all of the emotions running through him. And again, it's not really a role you'd associate with Fred MacMurray.
There's sort of that cool facade, that kind of slick salesman, kind of a cad-like quality about him, but you can start to see all this stuff going on under the surface.
Yeah, the performance brought a lot to it. The dialogue, of course, is where the meat of the story is. But with somebody else acting in that role, I'm not quite sure they could have pulled across how complex a character he is.
And pull off that smooth jerk quality where, I mean, he's an asshole, but
he's a sleaze.
You kind of have to sympathize with him to some degree, at least for a lot of the story.
Well, the thing is, I don't really sympathize with him, and I love that. I have no sympathy for him. He goes into this woman's house and immediately starts like outrageously flirting with her when he knows she's married.
There's a speed limit in this state, Mr. Neff. 45 miles an hour.
How fast was I going, officer?
I'd say around 90.
Suppose you get down off your motorcycle and give me a ticket.
Suppose I let you off with a warning this time.
Suppose it doesn't take.
Suppose I have to whack you over the knuckles.
Suppose I bust out crying and put my head in your shoulder.
Suppose you try putting it on my husband's shoulder.
That tears it.
That may be a sales technique. It's never really told, but it goes beyond a sales technique when he goes over her house in the afternoon and the maid isn't there and the husband's not there. And then when he's expecting her at his house without really knowing and he's expecting her, it goes way beyond salesmanship. He's a sleaze.
You almost have to wonder if he's pulled this kind of trick with clients and clients' wives before, you know?
Right, which actually mirrors Barbara Stanwyck's character, Phyllis Dietrichson. Because, you know, we find out that she has also played the same part beforehand, and they're definitely playing a role for each other, which I think we'll talk about more later, but I wanted to bring it up very quickly because they had their performances down pat for each other.
Yeah. And even in that first scene where they first meet, you almost wonder if part of his flirting is he looks at her and already kind of gets a vibe off of her.
Of course.
Once she looks down at him, it's like...
She walks in half naked. I mean, risque now, much more risque then. They hold a flirty, full conversation with her. Just, I think she had just a towel on.
Yeah.
Like, who answers the door like that?
I also love thinking of Neff in the salesman point of view, just the way he does all these salesman tricks. Like when somebody throws him a question, he just sort of bats it off or doesn't even really answer. Like, maybe we should do this. Maybe we should. What about this thing? Maybe we could do that too. He's very non-committal in that sort of salesman way of trying to figure out where the land lay before he actually comes to a conclusion.
Which unfortunately is a big part of sales.
Yeah. And also there's this weird man's man quality about the character. I noticed the decoration in his apartment is all pictures of boxers.
Yes, I noticed that too.
Or when he's trying to sell Dietrichson, he immediately brings up football. Oh, he went to Stanford. Pretty good football team, huh?
He's always insisting on having something alcoholic to drink.
Yep. And of course, he goes bowling. I don't know why.
Yes.
Every time the bowling scene comes up, it makes me laugh in this movie.
It's very out of place. Like, oh, I didn't feel like going back to work, so I went bowling. You went bowling? Like,
I feel like there's a weird noir connection with bowling. I mean, going all the way up to The Big Lebowski. I've seen it in a couple of noir films where all of a sudden bowling comes into it for some reason. It's just really odd.
I can understand it as... You know how golf is considered a more wealthy sport that you can, you know, just solitary. You can be solitary playing golf. I think bowling was more of a middle to lower class game in the same fashion where you could play it alone if you chose to.
That makes sense, actually.
Still playing a sport, playing it alone, but you're not paying country club fees. I think that might be where it comes in.
And there's a lot of framing Neff as a lone guy. This guy living in an apartment on his own, as Phyllis puts it, surrounded by strangers. He seems to be the kind of guy who doesn't want too many connections, at least not until he encounters her.
Right.
There's also this sense that, unlike a lot of film noirs where we meet, you know, a relatively good guy who's led astray by a woman, you really sense that Neff has been kind of rotten to the core from the beginning, just waiting for the little the push, the excuse to show how nasty he is.
And it definitely is an excuse. They fall in together very quickly, like absurdly quickly, even by movie standards. Declarations of love within 24 hours type of quickly. Well, not quite 24 hours, but very quickly.
Declarations of lust, at any rate.
Declarations of lust within 5 seconds. They don't waste any time.
And the same way that Phyllis has this ulterior motive that she's had in her brain all this time, he kind of does too, with this idea of being the guy on the inside who wants to pull the perfect job at his work, knowing all the angles, just waiting for a chance to use all this information to pull off something.
Well, that's a test for him because his friend Barton Keyes, who is the claims investigator, I believe, he is the best at what he does. And it seems to be a point of pride for Walter to get one up over him, even though they're friends, even though they do say, I love you, and it's like a brotherly relationship, there's definitely that competitive nature to their push and pull. Like, Walter turns down the job of being Barton's assistant because they wouldn't be equals in any way at all. He would definitely be his subordinate, and that's unacceptable.
Well, especially for a guy who does seem to like to just fly on his own and doesn't want to have to report to anybody higher than, like, his supervisor. He doesn't want to have to operate in a team. As a salesman, he just goes off and does his thing, and he's done. Speaking to what you just said a second ago, though, I love the scene where Barton thinks he has it all figured out and is pointing out all the points of the plan, that, okay, it wasn't Dietrichson on the train, it was somebody else. And Neff is watching with this kind of guarded expression where it could be, oh shit, he's onto us, but also this tiny smile, like he appreciates how brilliant what we did was.
Exactly.
He sees the genius of it.
That's exactly what it is. And the whole time Barton is talking about this, I feel like Walter is just like, you're missing one thing. You're missing one thing. I'm still winning. It doesn't matter that you got as far as you did. You admire how well we did this, and you're still missing a part.
Yeah, you still can't prove it yet.
Yeah, and it's I don't know if you want to talk about this now, the undoing.
Sure.
It's funny that the crime itself for Walter would have been perfect. It would have been absolutely perfect. His role in the crime was pinned onto another guy, and it turned out that his jealousy undid him. Even though he fell into this relationship with Phyllis very quickly, and they shared a lot of intimacy, down to the intimacy of getting rid of her husband, there was jealousy.
Against who? Against Nino there? Or?
Nino, yeah.
I didn't really see it that way.
I honestly think it was the jealousy that undid him, because he's the 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th, 13th. He knows that Phyllis has been working some other guy. And that's when he decides to go to her house and tell her how it's going to work out. And he didn't have to do that.
I feel like, to me, that was just overconfidence, because I almost feel like his love affair with Phyllis kind of dies with the murder. Because from then on, he's not as romantic with her. He's thinking about the plan and trying to stay out of jail and trying to get it to work, while she's much more about, this is driving us apart now. It almost seems like the affair is soured for him by that point. With the whole thing with Nino, I think it's much more a case of, oh, I see somebody who's going to take my fall for me.
I think that's how it shook out. Mm-hmm. It definitely shook out that his better sense overcame him, and he wanted to make sure that the rotten core was gotten rid of, and that young kid can hook up with his girlfriend again. But I don't think for her it was relationship at all. In fact, she tells us that she never had love for him or anyone else. She's pretty much saying she's a sociopath. But for her, it's about the money. If it had been about love, they could have cut their losses and left, not sued for the insurance money. But it's about the money for her.
It is, and yet at the same time, this comes to a big question for me in the movie. Why doesn't she shoot him that second time?
That is a good question. I know the movie wants to wrap it up in, oh, she really does love him. Oh, well, what can you do? But I think, and it's a possibility, that she was trying one last round of manipulation. Oh, I'll shoot him once and then just not be able to shoot him again to tie him to me. Like, I really do love you. I can't kill you, even though I know I should, but I can't.
See, I thought one other possibility is that she's waiting for Nino to get there. And then she can say, oh, he attacked me. I had to shoot him in self-defense, and wait for Nino to suddenly grab the gun and take care of him for her.
The first time I saw this, I remember thinking when Walter tells Phyllis to leave the door open and shut out the lights, that he has given her the perfect setup to shoot him as an intruder.
That's true.
But she doesn't. And that always shocked me. I felt like that was a perfect opportunity for her to get rid of him.
I mean, he has the perfect opportunity right when he walks in. He can just choke her right there and leave and be done with it.
Right.
I feel like it's this ego that he has to keep chatting and make sure she knows that he got it over on her.
With both of them.
Another thing I'm interested in, though, is going back to the Nino thing. I think his plan falls apart as soon as he realizes how she was manipulating him and realizes that he is just this innocent kid. He wasn't having this affair with her, that she was pushing him into trying to kill Lola. And that's when his plan starts to fall apart because he suddenly feels like he can't do it. He can't pit it on his kid.
He feels bad for Lola.
Yeah. I also was interested in this idea that once Phyllis is dead, that's when we see him actually let Nino get away. And that he also feels compelled to go tell Barton the truth. It's almost like once Phyllis is gone, his conscience is restored somehow.
I don't think he really ever had much of a conscience, but I think he knew he'd already been shot and there was no hiding it. He could disappear, but he'd be found. So the only thing he really could do is, okay, well, I'm going to go make this confession while I'm still up on my feet and delirious, and everyone will understand. They'll understand why I had to do it.
Yet he still wants to try and run to Mexico once he sees Keys.
It's so silly. I'm going to leave. See, I'm going to go to Mexico.
I feel like he felt he owed it to Keys to set him straight and tell him the truth.
Yeah, I don't think he appreciated the relationship he had with Keys until he was hiding something from him.
I also wondered if part of his motivation for doing this is this idea that being in insurance all the time and seeing these cases of people dying and people bumping each other off and people being hurt in accidents have kind of degraded his view of the value of life.
Well, yes. He sees them as figures, numbers, and this was thrown in sharp relief when he and Barton had a conversation about the differences between the numbers. Like, if he were to take on the subordinate role of his assistant, you know, he wouldn't just be doing numbers and figures and facts. He'd be dealing with visceral things. He'd be a surgeon and all of it with passions and dealing with the blood and the body. And you realize that for Barton, it's not just the money. He's not a checks and balances. He's all about the people and also making sure that these people don't think they can get away with anything. His moral core is very strong. Walter, on the other hand, is so jaded that these numbers are numbers. These people, they're numbers. Get a sale, it's up 1. Lose a sale, you're -1.
Always be closing.
Always be closing, exactly. He would get the coffee.
He is the Ricky Roma of this office.
Yes.
There's also this class thing, too, though. I mean, he's constantly talking about the money and has to be on the train so they can get the biggest possible payout. I love the detail that when he first sees the Dietrichson house, his first thing is, looks like it cost about $30,000. I mean, he's immediately putting
He is a numbers man.
The monetary value on it, yeah. Among the actors considered for Neff were Alan Ladd, James Cagney. I actually would have been interested to see what he would have done with it.
It would have been interesting, but I do enjoy James Cagney, but there are some films that I don't even want to imagine another actor playing.
Considering how stylized the dialogue is, I think his naturally stylized delivery would have been a little too much. The really interesting one was George Raft, who read the script, and he was reading it and was talking to the executives like, where's the scene? They're like, what scene? The scene where he pulls out the badge and reveals he's an undercover cop. He was trying to get them to rewrite the script to make Neff a cop because he didn't want to play a bad guy. So yeah, that was it for him. Now let's talk about Barbara Stanwyck, because oh my God, I love Barbara Stanwyck. She is awesome.
She is fantastic. But, and I think this every time I see Double Indemnity, she never looks like she's opening her mouth, but everything that seems to come out of her is just so smooth, and her diction is beautiful, and I have no idea how, because she never opens her mouth.
The way she coos the name Walter whenever she's talking to him, it's a little spooky and seductive in a creepy way, too. This was a kind of a switch for her, too. She hadn't really played a role this dark before, and I guess she was actually a little reluctant to do it, worrying what it would do to her reputation. I mean, she's played all sorts of different stuff, and she's just as good in comedies. Have you ever seen The Lady Eve with her and Henry Fonda? She's hilarious in that movie.
Oh, even though her character is dark, she never has to play her very dark. There's only maybe one time where she's saying about how she never loved anybody that it gets a little dark. The entire film is her playing as a seductress and as a victim.
And just like McMurray, she plays it so cool. Both of them, they're not very heavily emotive. They don't get really heavily dramatic. Everything is very kind of casual.
Chill.
Yeah. The way she's trying to set up sort of, I think, a rationale for him to kill her husband when she's talking about,
Every time I buy a dress or a pair of shoes, he yells his head off. He never lets me go anywhere. He keeps me shut up. He's always been mean to me. Even his life insurance all goes to that daughter of his. That Lola.
Nothing for you at all, huh?
No, and nothing is just what I'm worth to him.
So you lie awake in the dark and listen to him snore and get ideas.
Walter, I don't want to kill him. I never did. Not even when he gets drunk and slaps my face.
It's such a half-hearted delivery of this. She's not getting melodramatic. It's just like, yeah, he beats me up too.
Well, I feel like she wanted to be like, oh yeah, it's a daily occurrence, whatever. It's normal day. I get smacked around. Which actually was the line I was wondering if she's telling the truth.
What we see of her husband, I would believe it. I wouldn't be surprised.
Really? I disagree completely. Really? Yeah, I think, he's a little cranky, but he did nothing that would strike me as a person who would be totally abusive.
There's a real control aspect to him, I think, kind of goes in with that.
Maybe. But all of this is coming from her.
Well, no, from a scene we actually see of him when he's talking to the daughter in particular. There's a scene where he's like, where are you going? Who are you going with? Who's that? There's something very creepy about that gives me this sense of him being this very controlling parent and probably very controlling husband, too.
I don't know. See, I think in that instance, it may have been, I don't feel like we got enough of a look at him and his interactions with anybody. But it may be that what we saw, Walter interpreted that way as controlling and abusive. But what we may have been seeing was an extraordinarily protective parent because her mother's gone, and this is all he has of her mother.
That could be. There was also when they mentioned him going to the school reunion, and he's like, that should be a good time. And he suddenly snaps with, don't I deserve a good time every once in a while? I feel like we see this hair-triggered temper just coming out around the edges here and there.
It's possible. I still feel like Phyllis was not a peach to live with.
No.
And he's like, I'm just going for 4 days. And it's very difficult to accept Phyllis in a victim role. I think she is overstating her husband's nature.
Quite possibly. It's not like, say, Jane Greer in Out of the Past when we see Kirk Douglas haul out and slap her and realize,
exactly.
Wow, there's another side to this. With her, it's tough to say.
I feel like everything that we saw relating to the husband is murky water. I mean, whatever you put on to his actions could be true.
I do respect at least that they didn't try to make him this saintly character. That
would have been over the top.
It's Lola is kind of the figure of guilt for Walter, so
right.
We don't need to make his victim this nice guy.
Plus, Walter, as we understand him, never would have killed somebody, with a halo on his head.
Yeah.
He would need a reason, and I think the reason for him, besides his lust turning to love of Phyllis, is that he's rescuing her.
She keeps talking about how, he ignores me. We just sit there in silence. That even if he's not abusive, it's a very unhappy marriage. And he actually says something about how she's married to somebody who doesn't love her the way he does. So it's almost the sense he's ungrateful for what he has. And therefore, Walter figures, well, I'm going to take it then.
That's the justification, but it's probably not the truth. We do find out that Phyllis murdered his first wife as well, and that was for profit. The profit being that now she could marry the husband because the husband has money. But now the husband is getting upset at how much money she's spending, and there's, a little bit of financial difficulties, so now I have to get rid of him and collect on insurance for more money. And it is a pattern with her. And it's by whatever means necessary.
Okay, we got to talk about the wig.
I like the wig. It took a while for it to grow on me because it kind of looks absurd.
It kind of adds to it, though, in a way that she has this really cheap, crazy hairdo that doesn't look quite right. And I think it actually adds to the character in a way.
I'm not sure if it was intentional, but it does have a performative aspect. We're obviously watching a movie. So we know that Barbara Stanwyck is an actor, and we know she's playing a role, and we know her wig should not look like a wig. If this was intentional, it does add to the character a little bit by saying, oh, well, not just the actress acting in the role is a performance, the role itself is a performance. So Phyllis is also playing a role. She's playing the role of a victim, of a put-upon housewife, a lonely put-upon housewife. I don't know that the wig detail is intentional, but I do like the read on it.
Supposedly, Billy Wilder, the director, claimed after the fact that he felt it added to the cheap sleaziness of the character, but some of the executives thought it made her look like George Washington.
I don't think it makes her look like George Washington, but it's a bit plasticine.
It looks like a really bad bleach job, which I think
it does.
Almost hints at, her class of who she was before she married this guy. Mm-hmm. Also, the problem is now I'm watching it and it suddenly struck me who it looks like. It looks like Ed Wood's wig from Glen or Glenda. I mean, it's the exact same shape. There's one moment where it looks like, I thought for a second she was wearing an Angora sweater. It's like, holy shit. But no.
The wig itself, like the base of the wig, looked fine to me. It was the bangs.
Yeah, the bangs are crazy.
And I do remember thinking, oh, how the hell did she get her bangs to just kind of puff up like in that perfect
and flip,
circle?
Yeah.
And the back of it is parted in a different way. That must have been one hell of a hairstyle.
It almost looks like a helmet, like her battle helmet or something. Interesting to note that when she made this movie, Stanwyck was not only the highest paid actress, but the highest paid woman in America. She actually earned the same amount that Fred MacMurray and Edward G. Robinson did for this role, which is unfortunately still rare today in Hollywood.
Yeah, I was just thinking it's probably the last time that happened.
Yeah. And after this, she'd go on to do a bunch of other film noir roles, including The Strange Love of Martha Ivers, Clash by Night, and Crime of Passion with her and Raymond Burr. Good stuff. And now we come to, I think, my favorite, Edward G. Robinson as Barton Keyes. Dear God, I love this guy.
He's great. I like him in this role. I think he works better as a more central character. He's a bit crusty, but very endearing. And I feel like that's a very hard line to walk.
It's funny because, he started off playing gangsters. He was Little Caesar. Yeah. He's all these bad guys in movies.
That was him.
Yep, the bad guy in Key Largo, all this stuff. And during that time, he was able to switch into comedy. And this is kind of the point where he stopped getting the lead roles and started to realize he was going to have to take on supporting parts. And I'm glad he did. He supposedly was reluctant to, but he signed on for this because it's such a good role. It might be his best role ever.
He feels like a character actor before character actors were truly a thing.
Yeah.
As he walks in and he's transformed into this character. Because this is nothing like the Edward G. Robinson we know from any of the other films before this. He completely transforms. I believe him in this role.
And again, with the dialogue, you talked about the performative aspects with Phyllis. Boy, Barton has it in spades. Whenever he gives one of his monologues, and he doesn't just, yell it at somebody or recite it. He is performing it.
Murder's never perfect. Always comes apart sooner or later. And when two people are involved, it's usually sooner. They may think it's twice as safe because there are two of them. But it isn't twice as safe. It's 10 times twice as dangerous. They've committed a murder. And it's not like taking a trolley ride together where they can get off at different stops. They're stuck with each other and they've got to ride all the way to the end of the line. And it's a one-way trip and the last stop is the cemetery.
I cannot believe this guy, didn't get an Oscar nomination for this, but never got an Oscar nomination in his career.
Ever?
Ever. He got like an honorary one just after he passed away posthumously, but...
What good does that do him?
I know. If you look at the breadth of his career from this to, even Soylent Green, all this stuff, he's just incredible.
I think that his role is notable in film noir since film noir usually focuses, if I remember correctly, on detectives. And based on what I know of film noir, he should have been a more central character rather than just the threat of exposure.
I do kind of like the irony of where normally you'd be following this kind of character and rooting for him to solve the crime.
Yeah.
If the film's working and you're sort of in Neff's shoes, you're afraid of him and what he's going to uncover. The fact that he's so good is the threat. I also love the fact that deep down, yes, he's a businessman and he focuses on logic and reason, but he's a romantic too. Like you said, that speech about how the insurance investigator he's a judge and jury and the priest and psychiatrist all rolled into one.
Surgeon. It's very visceral, very human.
Yeah. A beautiful touch I noticed. When Neff goes into his office later, Keyes has a couch like a psychiatrist and a chair right next to it. That is just such a perfect detail of kind of how he sees himself. Also, the whole speech about Keyes almost getting married. The idea that this guy almost actually did get married, but the little man suddenly spoke up and he decided he had to check on his wife and found up all this stuff that made him decide not to. And yet he never does that with Neff, really.
Well, he doesn't have to. Neff is another man. He wouldn't need to check in on him like that because Neff does not need a babysitter.
To me, one of the most heartbreaking moments of the movie is when Neff breaks into Keyes' office and plays the dictaphone and hears Keyes actually sticking up for him. I've known him for 11 years, and I can assure you he's not involved in all this. Again, with the realization that, oh, yes, he is, and Barton's going to find that out, and it's going to break his heart. Film noir, generally, you have the femme fatale, and as we've talked about, usually have sort of the good girl, which would seem to be Lola in this movie. I suggest it's actually Keyes. Because in a way, usually the good girl is the relationship that the hero should take that would lead him down the right path. And that's Keyes in this movie. If he had kind of taken the job with Keyes and gone down the straight and narrow, Neff probably would have been fine.
Framed that way, definitely.
It leads that last line or the recurring line of, I love you too. I mean, it really is kind of a bromance at the center of this movie.
Speaking of that relationship with Lola, I did fear when Walter started taking her out on what we can call dates that they were going to fall in love. And I did not want the story to go there. They've already established she's a kid. They've established she's been through hell already. And I could see the film setting it up. And when that didn't happen, I breathed a sigh of relief.
It started to bend that way in the book, at least on his side, which I did not like. I like the fact that he's almost a replacement father figure for her instead. He starts it off as just trying to keep her quiet, but you can see that he also feels this guilt and is trying to assuage it. Yeah,
which is why he makes that final move to tell Nino to go call her and to leave.
And to tell Keyes to break it to her gently and take care of the two of them.
Yes.
Speaking of which, we have Jean Heather playing Lola Dietrichson. Heather was also in Going My Way the same year. She'd also appear in Murder, He Says, and Red Stallion in the Rockies before she was in this auto accent that disfigured her and kind of cut short her acting career, unfortunately. Filling that role, she's really good. She has that really great innocent naivety to her. And that scene where she starts to realize that Phyllis was involved in the crime, and this idea of seeing her trying on her mourning hat a little too early.
Yeah. She also decided to give Phyllis the benefit of the doubt. She decided, when she found her mother with the windows open and her bedclothes off when she had pneumonia, when she found her like that, she must have imagined it, or she misremembered it. So she kind of repressed that memory because she does not want to think poorly of anyone. Nino, who she said has a hot temper and he dropped out of school and got fired, but he's a really good guy and she can't see the bad in him. She didn't want to see the bad in her.
Which leads to an interesting point where I think both of them in that car in that scene are feeling tremendous guilt over the death of Dietrichson. She thinks she could have prevented if she had said something, and, well, Neff actually did the deed, so...
Right.
Well, we already discussed him a little bit, but there's Tom Powers as Mr. Dietrichson. Powers was a stage actor who appeared in a number of plays by George Bernard Shaw. He'd also appear in the film noir The Blue Dahlia, Angel and the Bad Man, Destination Moon, and Donovan's Brain, that one we saw at the Sci-Fi Marathon a couple of years ago with the brain in the jar. But we kind of already discussed him in detail about whether he's an asshole or not.
The great asshole debate.
The great asshole debate of Double Indemnity. I say yes. Next we have Byron Barr as, and this is one of my favorite film character names of all time, Nino Zacchetti. That just sounds cool. It just rolls off the tongue.
It sounds like a name from The Godfather.
It does. We sent Nino Zacchetti to deal with him. This was actually his first film. He'd also appear in Tokyo Rose, They Made Me a Killer, and Appointment with Danger. And the screenplay very pointedly doesn't let us get very close to him to kind of find out what he's about. We mostly see he's kind of a pugnacious dude. And I think that allows us for a lot of the movie to suspect he actually is in league with Phyllis.
He has a suspicious nature, and we already know he's hot-headed, so it does set him up as a red herring.
He's kind of like Tug from Brick, this kind of guy who's waiting to explode, and it's just a matter of characters pointing him in the right direction. His part is really different in the book. Do you mind me spoiling that?
No, go ahead.
In the book, it's a little ludicrous. He actually is dating Lola because he's investigating Phyllis, because Phyllis not only killed the former Mrs. Dietrichson, but a couple of kids as well, to sort of set this pattern of death so it wouldn't look suspicious when she killed her. And his father was the doctor who investigated it and was disgraced as a result, and I think committed suicide. So he's investigating to try and prove that she committed these crimes. It's really silly.
That's absurd.
And it's so much better that he's just sort of the thug boyfriend. That works a lot better in this. We also have to bring up Richard Gaines as Edward Norton Jr. And I'm sorry, every time I hear that he's Edward Norton, it just makes me laugh a little bit.
I know, but...
He was also in A Night to Remember, the film noir Brute Force, Ace in the Hole, also directed by Billy Wilder, and Ransom, the original one that inspired the Mel Gibson film. And I kind of go back and forth on his performance. That one scene where he's laying out his suicide theory, I'm never sure if it's great in the sense that he's performing too and he's just not as good at it, or if the actor's giving it a little bit too much.
I don't care. I mean, either way, that works for me. It works for me that he's over the top and he's trying to impress his investigator and salesman. He even says, "Oh, you think because I have a big office, I'm an idiot." So, I mean, and the joke is that he's wrong.
He's very wrong.
He's wrong. His theory is totally wrong. So he is an idiot with a big room.
And he thinks he's being so smart. And then
right, and smug.
And Keys is just sitting there like, no, wrong. And when he tries to walk it back when Phyllis kind of blows up at him, he's like, well, we're willing to negotiate a settlement.
That scene was vital. We see in that scene how good of an actress Phyllis is.
And then he does it.
Does what?
He jumps. Suicide. In which case the company is not liable. You know that, of course. Now, we could go to court.
I don't know anything. In fact, I don't know why I came here.
Just a moment, please. I said we could go to court. I didn't say we want to. What I want to suggest is a compromise on both sides. A settlement for a certain sum, a part of the policy value.
Don't bother, Mr. Norton. When I came in here, I had no idea you owed me any money. You told me you did, then you told me you didn't. Now you're telling me you want to pay me a part of it, whatever it is. You want to bargain with me at a time like this. I don't like your insinuations about my husband, and I don't like your methods. In fact, I don't like you, Mr. Norton. Goodbye, gentlemen.
And for me, that would have been the moment, oh, she's done this before.
She does play it a little too well, yeah.
Yeah, she is far too good of an actress for this.
One other one I noticed, and I'd never even copped this actor being in the movie before, Walter's office mate Lou is Douglas Spencer from the reporter from The Thing from Another World, Scotty. He was the monitor in This Island Earth, the almighty toilet hog on Metaluna, and in Shane. And he has like one line, like, sure, where he gets out of the office, but it was weird to see him. I've never seen him with hair before. He's always bald in movies, so interesting to see him pop up.
Perhaps that was a wig as well.
Next we come to the director, Billy Wilder. Oh, God, what an amazing career this guy had. He could do pretty much any genre. He did comedies like The 7-Year Itch and Some Like It Hot, The Apartment, Sabrina, dramas like The Lost Weekend and Ace in the Hole, war movies like Stalag 17, and film noirs like this and Sunset Boulevard. I mean, he did all of them incredibly adeptly. He was nominated for Oscars 21 times, 8 as a director. He'd win 2 for The Lost Weekend and The Apartment, and 3 writing Oscars for those movies and Sunset Boulevard. And just putting the movie together the way he did, it's just superb. Just the right mix of moments that are really funny, kind of in a weird, darkly humorous way, and really dramatic too.
I had thought going into recording this, I'm like, oh, I don't think I've ever seen a Billy Wilder film, but I know his name. And then to see, I've seen 4 of the ones you just mentioned, and they are all very different. But the one similarity they share is that I don't notice the direction.
That seems to be something that's lost with directors these days. It seems like the regarded ones, it's like, here's my stamp.
You're an
Notice
auteur
me
now. Yeah.
That's why I think directors like Ron Howard never get the credit they deserve. He's so good at just being plugged into a movie, doing a really good job, makes a solid movie, moves on to the next one.
There's a director who directs the movie like a play, where he isn't in it at all. You know, a director sits, in the audience or backstage. They don't exist. And then there are directors who insert themselves into it. We've talked about this before with documentarians who insert themselves into the documentary. Mm-hmm. Most directors, I don't want to say this too broadly, but I don't think there's any way to talk about it besides that. Most directors these days are inserting themselves. They're imposing a style.
Yeah.
And like Ron Howard, like Billy Wilder, there are directors who don't go as noticed because their style is flexible with the material. And that's a technical skill.
And there are even stylish tricks in this, but they're stylish things that are sort of unobtrusive. I'm thinking of, and I'd never noticed it before this viewing, Walter getting into the elevator at the beginning of the movie. The elevator goes up. We'd seen the doors close on like the hallway. The doors close, the elevator goes up, and they open up on the big atrium of the insurance office.
Right.
And the camera moves out with Neff over the railing to see that. And I've never noticed how amazing that is all in one shot. I mean, it's easy to tell how they did it. Probably the elevator set just turned around.
Right.
But it's so smooth. At the same time, it's not beating you over the head with, look at this effect, isn't this cool? It just lets you just glide in with Walter into the scene.
And that was a great shot, but I didn't notice it until you brought it up.
There you go.
And that's what I mean. It's like I had been drawn so deeply into the story and just related or not related with the characters in such a way that I did not notice those things. The one thing I did notice was a mistake. And it was a glaring mistake. It just took me right out of the story. Is that a wedding ring? Walter's wedding ring reveal. The actor wears a wedding ring while he's playing a man who is single.
Maybe he's not. Maybe he has a wife somewhere.
Well,
we never found out about it.
I am just going to say it's an error, but I could spin it into a deeper storyline about how he had a wife and she passed away and he guards his heart and blah, blah, blah. But it was a mistake.
See, I'm going to read it as like a Don Draper thing where he took somebody else's identity. In fact, God, thinking about it, I could so picture John Hamm playing Walter Neff. As Don Draper had that same kind of attitude. I almost feel like Draper took a lot from the Walter Neff character in terms of being that kind of callow type character. One other goof to add with the wedding ring that you saw, the hallway scene, the famous shot where Phyllis hides from Keys, wouldn't actually work in real life as apartment doors never open out into hallways. They always open in.
Do they really never?
Never.
Huh.
I think it's a safety issue.
I never thought of that.
If there's like a fire, your door's blocking the way, can't happen, so.
No idea.
The movie was written by Wilder and mystery author Raymond Chandler. Normally, Wilder would work with screenwriter Charles Brackett, but he characterized this as one period where they cheated on each other with other filmmakers.
Mm. So he had the kind of relationship with his writer that Walter had with Barton.
Yeah, I'd say kind of
bromance.
Similar. Yeah. Wilder and Chandler didn't get along too well, though, despite how great the finished film was. Chandler, as a writer, preferred to work alone, and he was a recovering alcoholic, and he quickly fell off the wagon from working with Wilder. He says because of his rudeness, his womanizing, and his tendency to wear a hat while working. As he said, it always makes me think he's about to leave momentarily. And he refused to continue working until Wilder apologized. And Wilder's next movie, The Lost Weekend, with Ray Milland as an alcoholic, was supposedly sort of a rebuke to how much trouble the drinking that Chandler was engaged in caused during their collaboration.
It doesn't surprise me.
When it comes to mystery writers, I've always been more of a Dashiell Hammett fan than a Raymond Chandler one, but there is no denying he is so good at dialogue.
He is excellent with dialogue.
He was originally approached because it would be great publicity, but I mean, he had a real good sense of what would play on screen as opposed to a book, because originally they wanted to include a lot more of the dialogue from the book, and Chandler was like, no, that's not going to work, and he hired some actors to actually just read the dialogue from the book as if it were a script, and it was clear it just wouldn't work.
It doesn't. One mistake a lot of writers make is that they forget to read the work aloud. There are words that seem to work when you have them on the page, but once you say them out loud, they're clunky. It's just a mess. And sometimes that's fine. Sometimes in a book you can get away with dialogue.
I hate to say it, Stephen King kind of has that quality.
He can have that quality. There are times when his words are taken word by word in film, and they sound just hokey.
They just do not sound natural
but
at all,
on paper they're amazing, and that it's not all the time, but he definitely has that problem
with Chandler, though. I mean, if you've read any of the Philip Marlowe books or seen most of the movies based on them, like The Big Sleep, just the dialogue just sings. And he's actually supposedly visible in the film. Neff walks by him in the insurance office where he's sitting there reading a book, and that's supposedly the only appearance of Chandler on film. The story has changed from the book in a lot of ways. and pretty much all of them improve on the book. The Keyes character in particular, he is not as likable in the book. When it comes to the crime, he knows immediately that it's murder, but he doesn't know how. And Norton actually brings up the point that Keyes finally stumbles on into the movie, the idea that he didn't file a claim for the broken leg, and uses that to back up his suicide theory, that he didn't lay a claim because he was afraid that his family would find out and prevent him from committing suicide and so forth. And Keyes is just like, no, it's murder. I can't prove it, but I know it. I know it in my gut. It's murder. You should accuse her of murder right now, right away.
Well, he does know it's murder because he has that gut, that knot, that lump of cement, but he won't make any accusations until he has a timeline.
And in the movie, it's the little man is operating on logic. He realizes that he didn't file the claim and there's something behind it, and that's what starts getting him moving. In the book, he's just immediately less crusty old know-it-all. It's like, yeah, I know it's murder. It's definitely murder. Trust me, prosecutor. Yeah, don't worry about slander. It's fine. And you just don't like him at all. Phyllis has this weird angel of death thing going on through the whole book.
She kind of does have an angel of death thing, except angel of death was more mercy killings or perceived mercy killings, and her husband didn't seem to need mercy killing. No. I don't even know how to put it because that sounds wrong too, but he wasn't ill. He wasn't so elderly that he would die.
He was just an asshole.
He was
The ending is completely changed. In the original, Neff goes onto this hillside and gets shot at by this car and doesn't see who does it and wakes up in the hospital, and that's when Keyes sets it up so Neff and Phyllis go off together on a cruise, presumably to fulfill a suicide pact and jump off the back and be eaten by sharks.
Wow.
It's really weird.
Yeah, that doesn't work for me.
Kane commented that the screenplay's ending was superior to his own and very pleased with the movie. And yeah, I do think the ending is definitely superior in the film.
It is. Just by what you told me.
It's just really just sort of a kind of a wet fart of an ending, frankly. I mean, this movie really builds to a big finale. It's great.
Right. It's a very clean ending.
Yeah. Nice and tidy. It kind of wraps everything up in a good way, in a satisfied way.
That can be a problem sometimes when everything's wrapped up a little too neat. But in this sort of movie, it works. In this movie, we know who and we know why right away. The entire movie is, how did it happen? And then what happens after. The murder is almost secondary to everything that happens after.
In most of these kind of film noirs where we see the crime being committed, the mystery is always, what did they miss? There's always going to be something that's going to trip them up. It's always the question of, what did they miss and how is it going to come back to bite them in the ass?
I feel like to make a modern comparison, or a relatively modern comparison, Double Indemnity is like the Law & Order Criminal Intent of the Law & Order series. In the original Law & Orders, you find a body and then you solve a crime. In Criminal Intent, I believe it was Criminal Intent, you knew who did it. And then you spend the rest of the show watching how they find out.
Wow, I suddenly imagine Edward G. Robinson as Matt McCoy. That would be pretty awesome.
I know.
I could totally picture him doing that. What was it he always brought up when he's like plea dealing? Depraved indifference, 3 years. I don't know why he always fell on that particular phrase, but now I can just picture Robinson doing it. Depraved indifference, eh? Yeah.
But there's something about Keyes that we didn't have a chance to mention, and it's just kind of an Easter egg, I hope. Most of the time when we see Keyes' name spelled out, it's on his door. He has a glass door with the painted letters, and we're in the inside looking out. And it's in most frames in his office. So Keyes, backwards, and backwards is what we see this whole time, is SEYEK, which is seeks, and the middle is Y, seeks Y. And I'm hoping that's a mistake, because I do tend to pick up on ridiculous stuff and twist it to work, but seeks Y, and that's literally what he does.
Oh, I like that one.
And one other thing that I wanted to note, the name of the insurance company is called Pacific All Risk. Pacific, its base is calm. Its definition, besides, of course, the Pacific Ocean, is peaceful. So the idea that a peaceful outcome...
We'll take the risk. You can relax.
Yeah, exactly. Like, calm down. But it's risky. Which actually, we find out about the name of the insurance company in the first 5 minutes or so of the movie, but the movie opens on a car just barreling through traffic, running red lights, and Walter calmly going into the elevator, calmly going into his office. It's like that urgency to that calm. So once he's in the Pacific Insurance Company, everything's okay. Everything's calm.
I took it more to be, I'm losing blood. I can't move very fast. Oh, I did want to bring that up. Two amazing things with that.
Yes.
The fact that the bloodstain keeps spreading
bigger.
over the course of it.
Yeah.
But also, unlike a lot of other movies where somebody gets shot, Walter doesn't use his left arm for the rest of the movie.
Yeah, it's pretty great.
I mean, you see when he's using the dictaphone, he's just to awkwardly shove everything over with his arm and
put
light
down
a
his
cigar.
cigarettes.
Yeah. That's a really nice touch. I think more modern movies could learn that. I'm looking at you, Con Air, where Nicolas Cage gets shot in the arm. He's just like,
hush you. Con Air is a masterpiece.
All right, now let's talk about the cinematography by John Seitz. Seitz was nominated for 7 Oscars, 3 of them for Billy Wilder movies, including this, The Lost Weekend and Sunset Boulevard. He also shot Sullivan's Travels, This Gun for Hire, The Big Clock, and the sci-fi movie When Worlds Collide. And every time I watch this, I forget how dark it is. I mean, they were really pushing the limit to how dark you could make your movie and still be able to make out what's happening.
They did. I think the darkest scene is the final scene between Phyllis and Walter. She turns out all the lights, and I nearly expected the goldfish bowl to be illuminated because we need some light in the scene, but it is very, very, very dark.
And this is, I think, the movie that really popularized the noir idea of light coming through blinds, the Venetian blinds look. You see that a lot in this movie. And the use of darkness. I was struck by when Phyllis visits Walter at his apartment and they go in the kitchen for him to get a beer. And they don't bother to turn the lights on. And it's in this darkness he starts talking about all these murder schemes that failed.
Well, it's secrecy. They're plotting something in secret. Everything has to have cover of darkness over it.
But also, I feel like this darkness in Walter kind of coming to the fore.
That too.
Because then the end of the scene where he tells her, oh no, I'm going to help you do it and we're going to do it right. She starts the scene on the edge of the couch right next to a lamp that really makes her sweater and hair glow, and he's in shadow on the other side when he makes that declaration. It's like he's edging into the darkness with her around. Even their first kiss in the apartment, there's like kind of slats of dark shadow on both of their faces.
Yeah.
Just so much of that. This type of composition you'd see in movies like Citizen Kane and obviously some of the old German expressionist films, but I think this is where it really became wedded to the crime element of film noir. This is where that whole aesthetic really started, I think.
Well, it's still the idea of shadows, things hidden in the shadows, and the mysterious figure who we know exists because we see a shadow and we see it moving, but who is it? It very naturally fits into a mystery. And
the atmosphere in the air, I was struck by when Walter goes to their place for the first time and talks about how dusty it is, and you can actually see the dust going through the shafts of light. I mean, most films wouldn't bother to do that, but it adds so much. Stanwyck commented that the way they lit the sets contributed to the actor's performance enormously. It was really easy to get into the mood of the scene once they just went on the set and saw it lit this way. The music for the film was by Miklos Roja. We've encountered him before on Time After Time. He also scored Spellbound, for which he won an Oscar, The Killers, King of Kings, and The Golden Voyage of Sinbad. Again, it's a score that doesn't get in the way of the film. It has these
not at all
nice pounding, ominous tones, but it doesn't really blast you over the head with it.
It's music to enhance rather than distract.
And also, again, there's some great sense of when not to use music. Certain scenes where they just pull it back and just have the actors talking or long silences to increase the suspense. Little bits of trivia on the production. This is actually based on a true story. The main story of the book and the film is based on the case of Henry Judd Gray and Ruth Snyder. Gray was a corset salesman who began this affair with Snyder and was convinced by her to kill her husband under the guise of a burglary. Unfortunately, neither of them were very good criminals. They did not plan it in meticulous detail all the way down the line. Many of the items supposedly stolen were found in Snyder's apartment after the crime, and her behavior during the police investigation quickly led police to suspect her, and they soon pretty much found out Gray was involved too, and the two lovers turned on each other in court. Both were eventually convicted and executed, and Snyder's execution is famous because a reporter snuck a camera in the death house on his ankle and managed to photograph the moment of her being electrocuted. It's a famous, famous picture. Kane would use the story as inspiration for both this book and The Postman Always Rings Twice, and Snyder's execution is actually dramatized in Picture Snatcher with James Cagney as the photographer.
Mm-hmm.
An alternate ending was actually filmed where Keyes watched as Neff is executed in the gas chamber. There are stills of it, but the scene itself has been lost. During editing, Wilder decided that the last exchange between Neff and Keyes was a much better way to end the movie.
Yeah, seeing forward to his death would punctuate the idea that it all ends in the grave, but we got that enough.
It feels like that Hays Code thing of we must see him punished sort of a thing. And I think it works much better on the two of them. Although one of the stills that exists of Neff being escorted in and Keyes is just outside the window kind of half looking at it and not really being able to look at it is a powerful image.
It is. I just feel like it would have slowed the film down right at the very end.
Yeah.
There's something so striking about Barton lighting a match on his own, which we see Walter doing that for Barton in every other scene that Barton has a cigarette. And it's only this one time.
It also, I think, makes the tragedy much more about these two characters. I mean, I get the implication there's a good chance Barton is out of the agency after this. He vouched for Neff. He completely missed what really happened. There's a sense that Neff has kind of brought Barton down, too, in a way. I wouldn't be surprised if after this they decide to make him resign because he completely misjudged this guy who was working right next to him all this time.
Or he may have chosen to resign for the same reason.
It could be. Maybe he finally decided he had seen enough. But it gives that last scene this real sense of tragedy. When he says, Walter, you're all washed up, you almost feel like he could be saying that about himself as well. The great moment where Neff and Dietrichson's getaway car fails to start was actually added after Wilder experienced car trouble when he was leaving the set for a lunch break. So he quickly summoned everybody back to reshoot the scene and added that moment where the car won't turn over.
It's a wonderful moment. It adds to suspense with something so simple. Like, they've done everything, everything's fine, but the car won't start.
Yeah.
And if they leave the car there's evidence, they have to get it to start.
Is this going to be the one thing that undoes them?
Yeah. It also puts Phyllis in the victim position again, needing to be saved because she's the driver and she can't get the car to start. And Walter just reaches over, turns the key, and the car starts. So he gets to rescue her yet again.
There's a bit of that sort of, let me fix it, I'm a guy. The mansplaining of the details of the crime, which is a great moment of exposition to let the audience know what's going to happen. But it's also like, make sure you do this. And she's like, I've got it. I know. I've got it.
But it also, by having that little exchange of, oh, well, you got to remember this, you got to remember that, wasn't just mansplaining. It was showing us just how much she knows. Because I would think somebody who had never murdered anyone before would need to be reminded of all these things and wouldn't mind so much. But she's down for it. She's like, oh, I know. I get it. Don't worry. She's been on this road before, and this is yet another hint to her serial murderous behavior.
It also highlights how nervous he is about
it.
That he's like, we got to make sure we get everything right. It's got to be perfect. As for the legacy of the movie, of course, it was highly influential in the film noir genre and paved the way for similar films such as The Postman Always Rings Twice, Body Heat, The Last Seduction, To Die For. The film was adapted for radio 4 times, the first time with McMurray and Stanwyck reprising their roles. The film would be remade for TV in 1973 with Richard Crenna, Samantha Eggar, and Lee J. Cobb from 12 Angry Men. And most recently, we saw that Double Indemnity is the favorite film of married political conspirators Frank and Claire Underwood on House of Cards. I love the fact that this is their idea of a romantic movie.
Romantic, but also very telling of, they two people in a murder unravels kind of stuff. Having in Double Indemnity as their favorite movie is not a good sign for where they're going.
No, it really isn't. Okay, what's your favorite scene from the film?
My favorite scene is the first time Phyllis and Walter meet in the grocery store. It's a small grocery store. There are very few people around, and they're trying so hard not to look conspicuous and doing exactly the opposite.
Can you get in the safe deposit box?
Yes, we both have keys.
Fine. But don't put the policy in there yet. I'll tell you when. Remember, you never saw it. You never even touched it. Do you understand?
I'm not a fool.
Okay. When is he leaving on the train?
That's just it. He isn't going.
What?
That's what I've been trying to tell you. The trip is off.
What happened?
Mister, could you reach me that package of baby food? That one up there? I don't know why they always put what I want on the top shelf.
We know they're trying to set up this murder and they have to keep it below the radar. And it's funny. It shouldn't be funny, but it is funny how bad they are at this part of it.
I especially love later when she has those crazy sunglasses on.
Yes. I'm just going to waltz into the grocery store with giant sunglasses, nothing to see.
And talk to this guy over the aisle of like baby food or whatever. For me, it would have to be Keyes demolishing the suicide theory. That monologue, I don't know how he does that, all in one take of just going through all those
Very
tiny little subdivisions, rapid fire.
Suicide by leaps, subdivided by leaps from high places, under the wheels of trains, under the wheels of trucks, under the feet of horses, from steamboats. But Mr. Norton, of all the cases on record, there's not one single case of suicide by leap from the rear end of a moving train. And you know how fast that train was going at the point where the body was found? 15 miles an hour. Now, how can anybody jump off a slow-moving train like that with any kind of expectation that he would kill himself? No, no soap, Mr. Norton. We're sunk, and we'll have to pay through the nose, and you know it. May I have this?
And just, it almost seems like the actor might have done this on his own, just grabs the water and goes, here, let me have that. Downs it, and you can see it goes all over Robinson's vest, like he barely even gets it into his mouth, and just leaves the scene. Oh, it's amazing. All right, what are your recommendations? What are movies that you think somebody who likes this might also like?
The first movie that came to mind is kind of low-hanging fruit, and that's Brick. It's a modern film noir, takes place in a high school, and it is incredible. Even if you're not sure you want to sit down and watch a film from 1944, just pick up Brick and give it a shot. And the other one is a little bit of a different take. It's A Scanner Darkly, based on the story by Philip K. Dick. And it's done in rotoscope, fully in rotoscope. And it's intriguing. I don't want to say too much, but if you know Philip K. Dick's work, you'll know it's off the wall.
For me, I'd have to go with, and this is also kind of low-hanging fruit, but Body Heat, the film noir from Lawrence Kasdan with William Hurt and Kathleen Turner that in many ways almost feels like a remake of this one, although it goes off into some interesting directions at the midpoint. It has a lot of interesting early performances by Ted Danson and Mickey Rourke. It's just superb movie. The other one was brought up by the metaphor of the croupier at the roulette wheel who wants to pull the inside job is Croupier with Clive Owen and Alex Kingston. Another great film noir about a guy who's kind of lured into pulling this dangerous job by this femme fatale and kind of has his own reasons for doing it as well. Terrific movie. It was one of his first big roles. He is great. And I always love Alex Kingston. Anything else to say about Double Indemnity?
It's always difficult to watch a movie that is objectively incredible and then see just how misogynist it is. Our character Walter, our anti-hero, I guess we could call him, he never offers Phyllis the contract to read. He always asks her, have your husband look it over. Is your husband here? Is the man of the house here?
Which, considering one of the cars is in her name, she should be able to look at it herself. Yeah.
Right. She absolutely should. And the idea that Phyllis's husband leaves her to just hang out at home and knit, and she's bored and she's lonely. And, the misogyny that comes around having to know where your daughter is. I know we've discussed this and argued about it back and forth, but just, it's still gross.
Yeah.
And that her boyfriend is instantly suspicious of her being in a car with another man. It's just all very gross.
The femme fatale kind of archetype in general has a weird duality in terms of being really misogynistic and sort of feminist in a weird way.
Yeah, I mean, she's always portrayed as this beautiful, nearly unattainable sex kitten who might have some fragility to her that needs protecting by some big, strong man. But she's also doing bad. She's not the good girl. She's not going to lean on a man for real power as it's perceived by her. So it's a faux feminist role.
A lot of times I find it depends on how they're depicted. I mean, you could argue the femme fatale kind of springs from post-World War II when all these guys came back from the war and found all these women had their jobs.
Well,
and there was that threat of, oh my God, the women are taking over.
The threat of a powerful woman. But at the same time, this is the threat of a powerful woman through the lens of a man. So that this woman has to be the most beautiful creature you've ever seen. And not just that, she's deadly. So because she's deadly and she's beautiful, there's much more intrigue.
But I think there's also the sense that sometimes the femme fatale is kind of crashing out of the perceived gender roles to commit crimes just like the guys can.
They do.
And sort of our out to take care of themselves in a way, and often can a lot better. We see that a lot more in the later film noirs, something like, say, The Last Seduction, where the femme fatale is sort of the protagonist of the movie and kicks ass.
But with femme fatale roles comes the idea that in order for a woman to have any power, she needs to steal power from a man. And that is so sexist. Women can have their own power without it detracting from male power. And I think that's the root of what bothers me about this type of character.
Yeah, that is an unfortunate limitation of the time.
That ends our discussion, but not the conversation. If you'd like to have your say about Double Indemnity or feel we missed something, check out the comments section for this episode on CinemaSpection.com and start talking. Email your comments, complaints, questions, and suggestions to CinemaSpection@gmail.com. You can also like our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter. Our show is available on iTunes and Stitcher, and if you like what you hear, please subscribe. If you have a moment to spare, please leave us a review as well. We appreciate any feedback you offer, and your review makes us more visible. We'll be back to discuss another movie next time. Until then, thanks for listening, and remember to keep watching closely. There's more to a movie than what's on a screen.
Goodbye, baby.